Most families wait too long to get essential planning documents in place. And when a crisis hits, this is going to cause stress, unnecessary costs. So today we are sitting down with estate planning attorney Amy Jenkins to talk about the must-have documents that protect your wishes and is going to give your loved ones peace of mind. Welcome to the Legacy Years. I'm your host, Christy Osborne, and I'm so glad you are here. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you, Christy. I am super excited to be here. I love sharing education and helping people to understand, why they need to think about this, why they need to do it, why it's not optional. So thank you very much for having me on the show.
Yeah, I love that. I love your heart about that. That's the way I approach my business too. And so I think it's so important. I wish more people would take the time to educate themselves on more things before they do hit that crisis. So I am glad that we are talking today. If you will, tell folks just a little bit about your practice, where you're located, how long you've been doing what you do.
Yeah. So I focus exclusively on estate planning, elder law, and probate. Our office is located here in McKinney, Texas. I am actually licensed to practice law in Texas, Oklahoma, and Colorado. And yeah. And let's see, we're here in McKinney. How long have I been doing this? Shockingly, I the other day I realized I've been licensed for 23 years.
Wow.
I know. I was like, how is that even possible? But it's gone really fast. And
How's it possible when you're only 30, right?
Oh, right. Math doesn't math, does it? Yeah. So, and I have been focused exclusively on this area of the law since 2017, I think 2017. That sounds about right. So
Okay.
What I mean by that is I don't do divorces or DWIs, and we certainly need attorneys that do all that stuff. So I just focus exclusively on this area. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think this is a much needed area. And I think there's a lot of confusion surrounding this. So I'm glad that we're kind of focusing on this topic today. So let's just kind of dive into the questions and educate some folks on planning documents that we all need in our lives. And I will tell you that my brother-in-law, who we lost, unfortunately, he was so smart about this stuff. And he was an attorney, but he was not in your area of the law. But he did such a good job setting documents up for my mother-in-law that it made all of our lives so much easier. And I just wish more people would do this. So let's talk about someone who's got nothing. They've not thought about this, or their parents haven't thought about this. For someone who has nothing, where should they start?
Yeah. And so when you say nothing, you mean no planning in place. No
planning.
Nothing. Okay. They're just, yeah. Okay. So, there's a handful of just essential documents, and I'll go over, I'll probably talk about 4 or 5 of them. One are your durable power of attorney. So you might hear people call this my legal financial power of attorney. So because that's what lets you access those types of things, bank accounts, and take care of business for the principal, the person you've named as agent. So lots of times you'll hear people say, I have my mom's power of attorney. So what they're saying is my mom has signed a document called a durable power of attorney. My mom is the principal and I am my mom's agent. So then the medical directives. So in medical directives, we're specifically talking about your medical power of attorney, your HIPAA authorization, and then another document which is called directive to physicians. Some people are familiar with that document as a living will. That gets down who would make your medical decisions for you if you cannot, who has access to your medical information, who can talk to the doctors and the nurses and the medical staff. And then the living will or directive to physicians is an end of life document. Then we would have will or trust, or will and trust. Those can work in conjunction with each other. And those, like a will, is going to name who gets your stuff when you pass away. A trust does a little more than that. So yes, it's going to say who gets your stuff when you pass away, but it's going to allow you that to happen without something called probate. And it's going to allow you to plan for some contingencies like minor beneficiaries, if you have people with special needs in your life, and it also has incapacity provisions. So, and I can go into more detail on that. That's kind of the big picture overview. There's a few other things that we do
Yeah.
that I think are also important, because what I see in my probate practice is where we hit the snags. What people are in conflict over, what people have been fighting about. So I add in a few other documents like instructions for remains. So do I want to be cremated? Do I want to be buried? Do I need a Nancy Reagan type funeral, or can you just, scatter some ashes at the ocean? So, because believe it or not, people can be in conflict over what to do with remains.
I believe that.
Yeah,
I've seen way too many conflicts surrounding death, period. Yeah.
we do a document called Declaration of Guardian. I jokingly call it the Britney Spears document because it kind of sums it up as to what this document does and why it's important. And I know not everyone is familiar with Britney Spears, what she went through, right? Long story short, they call it conservatorship in California. We call it guardianship here. But basically, she was declared incapacitated by a judge, and her father was named as her guardian. Now, when you are declared incapacitated and a guardian is named for you, you lose all your rights. And when I say all your rights, I mean the right to vote, the right to drive, the right to your own medical decisions, the right to manage your money, the right to open a checking account. So, Declaration of Guardian is a pre-need document that we say, hey, if you ever found yourself in front of a probate court judge and they were going to name you a guardian, who would you like the judge
Yeah.
to name? And then also, who would you like to exclude? So, Britney Spears document, the Declaration of Guardian. So, yeah, that's kind of the big picture overview of some of the most important documents. Yeah.
I love that you add in those because I do think, as you being the expert in your field, you know the problems that are going to arise. And I always tell clients, not a problem until it's a problem. And then what do you do? So, those are some great tips for people to add. A question on the guardianship document. If you have a guardian appointed document, you've said, okay, I would like this person to be my guardian. Do they still have to go to court if
Yeah.
you're incapacitated? Okay.
Yes, because that's the first thing that has to happen is, and I want to talk about too, like how this works in conjunction with the powers of attorney.
Okay.
Here's what will happen. We'll have someone who they don't have a power of attorney. They haven't done either a durable or a medical power of attorney, and they get sick, they become incapacitated, and they don't know what they're doing. They don't know where they are. They can't make decisions for themselves. And they have not appointed an agent under a durable or medical power of attorney to make their legal, financial, or medical decisions. So we have a person who can't take care of themselves, can't make their own decisions, and our only option is to go to guardianship court and ask the judge to appoint a guardian for that incapacitated person. And I like people to understand that because it is that simple. With a durable power of attorney and a medical power of attorney, you can generally avoid guardianship court.
Okay.
Now, why would we want to avoid guardianship court? Well, anything that involves court is going to involve attorneys, and attorneys have to generally charge by the hour. And it takes a lot of hours to get a guardianship done. So you're looking at easily $15,000-$20,000 for an uncontested guardianship.
Wow.
If people are going to fight over who wants to be your guardian, you can, I don't know, probably 4x that.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's why durable powers of attorney are so important, because in estate planning, we look at what happens when I'm alive and well, what happens if I get sick or become incapacitated, and what happens when I pass away.
Yeah.
So we need to be able to answer all of those questions and have a plan for all of those things.
And so my podcast is generally geared towards older adults, but some of these things are equally important for adult children who aren't married,
Yes.
to be sure that they have someone that could step in and take care of them. I just think it's great for anybody you're never too young, you're never too old for
Yeah.
planning
So
documents.
Here's how this works. When you turn 18, you are legally an adult in the eyes of the law. Now, mentally and frontal cortex wise, you're probably not an adult and your decision making powers are not refined. So, but once my kid turns 18, I don't have a right to take care, to access her bank account, to access her medical records, to help her get medical care. She's an adult.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So young adults must have these durable powers of attorney medical, because what's happening is I've heard a version of this story many times. Kid goes off to school, goes off to college. I don't know. They're playing softball or kickball or something with their friends and they break an ankle and they've got to go to the hospital, and there's nobody informing the parents because the hospital won't, because
Right.
that's going to violate this federal HIPAA privacy law and it'll cost them a lot of money if they get fined. And so there's no way. I mean, your kid, I have experienced these stories of where the kids have been in the hospital for days before the
Oh,
parents ever find out. And they find out because the roommate then has calls the parents because the kid's missing, right? And so turns out the kid's been in the hospital out of it for 3 days because they hit their
oh
head.
no.
Yeah. So it's important to have these documents, but also have them accessible. Right. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's why it's important for the young adults to have these
Yeah.
documents.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about the role of a power of attorney and the role of a healthcare directive. Can you kind of talk people through that? Because I think sometimes people think, well, I have power of attorney. I have all the power.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question because they do. They kind of blend it into one document, and it's actually not. We're talking about two separate documents. The durable power of attorney, which is I name an agent who can then take care of my business for me. And when I say business, I'm kind of using it as a big umbrella for my banking. You can talk to my employer. You can deal with my mail. Uh, of course, you can deal with the banks, but the one I put together is pretty extensive because you don't know what you don't know, and you don't know what's rolling down the road at you. So I may need to be able to talk to uh, my child's healthcare insurance, right, provider, but they're a young adult and they're not going to talk to me without having that durable power of attorney. So
Right.
think legal, financial, signing contracts, selling real estate, dealing with leases, landlords, all of that. And then we have a completely separate document called a medical power of attorney. And in that, you are just doing the same thing. You're naming an agent who can make your medical decisions for you if you can't make your own medical decisions. And because I'm in a coma, I am not with it mentally. I don't understand what I'm doing. And so that you name an agent to make those decisions for you. Why it's important is because you want to have the control over who you're giving these powers to.
Yeah.
So, if you don't have a medical power of attorney, what happens if you get in a situation and you can't make your own medical decisions? Well, it runs anything from the gamut of we're going to open up the code book and say who's the next person legally allowed to make that decision, which you may or may not agree with that person, right? If it's your mom, if it's your dad, if it's your sibling, that may be the last person on earth you want making medical decisions for you.
Yep.
And then at the other end, we have, well, I'm so incapacitated and I haven't named an agent for my medical decisions. The hospital is having to go to guardianship court. So, yeah, that's kind of the
So
difference between the two.
let's talk to folks about revoking the authority on those documents. And because I don't know if people even realize that that's an option,
Mhm.
but things can change over the years.
Things do change over the years. And, clients come in and, I met with some people today, their documents are about 25 years old. Well, 25 years ago, mom or mother in law was a great person to name as a backup agent. Well, now she's 80 years old, right? So things change. You can, number one, you can revoke these documents as long as you have the capacity to do so. And there's a couple of different ways to revoke it. You can outright revoke it in a piece of paper that says, revoke this durable power of attorney. I revoke this medical power of attorney, sign in front of a notary. So that's one way. But a much more common way is to create a new durable or medical power of attorney and sign it. And by the act of creating a new one and updating it and signing it, automatically revokes those prior powers of attorney. And then
Okay.
I always advise folks, when you do that, go get the old one and shred it or burn it or whatever, because you don't want someone coming across two different powers of attorney, especially if you've taken this group of people off and put a whole new group of people in. Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about doing this yourself. And I say that because there are so many, you can go out and Google medical documents forms or, all these things. So caution people about the
Mhm.
common mistakes that you see, the snags people get into when they try to do something like this that's this important
Okay.
by themselves.
Yeah, this is a real minefield here, unfortunately. And people think, and it's understandable, hey, this is a form. I'll just fill it out myself. No worries. So, a couple things that I see go wrong, because I get these documents sometimes in probate cases, sometimes, people just want me to bring their documents to me to review. So, one thing I find is common is they're executed incorrectly. Okay. They're signed, but maybe not notarized. They're signed and notarized, but maybe not witnessed. And different documents call for different types of signings. And then I've seen other crazy things, like literally notaries who don't know how to notarize.
Oh, no.
Yeah, they've forgotten their stamp. They've signed where the client is supposed to sign. And anyway, so anywhere from things like that to I have an employee here at my office who did an online trust. She said the biggest thing is I don't know what I was doing. I didn't know what powers I was giving to who. I didn't know or whom. I didn't understand what I was doing. I didn't understand what I was filling in. And then if I check this box, then this makes my durable power of attorney not work when I need it. But nobody understands what these legal terms mean. And so I
Right.
feel like that's one thing. I know we're living in this AI do it yourself world, but attorneys who practice exclusively in this area know things, right? We know all the little ins and outs and the tricks, and then there's a big one with trusts. So there's a lot of information out there, right? With all the different social media platforms and the YouTubes and all of that. There's a lot of information being disseminated out there. And now I notice like trusts are really big now because almost
Oh,
everyone's asking me about a trust. Great. But when you create a trust, your assets have to be tied to that trust. As a matter of fact, can I get a prop?
yeah.
When you create a trust, it's like you are creating a little red wagon. Okay. But in order for this trust to work like we want it to work, your assets have to be inside the trust. So my employee who told me that she did this, she has a trust. When she started working here, she said, I have a trust. I've done my planning. And I'm like, oh yeah, tell me about it. And she said, oh, it's an online deal. And I said, okay. And I said, well, are your assets in the trust? And she said, huh? And I said, for your trust to work like you want it to work, your house has to be in it. Your bank accounts need to be in it. And she's like, nobody told, oh, I didn't read anything about that. And so that's a huge problem right there. So I hope that makes sense what I'm
It
saying.
does.
You're going to get this trust and there's nothing in it. It's no better than having a will, right? And so, and I don't know how much detail you guys want me to go into, but one of the big benefits of a trust, and I'm talking about a revocable living trust right now, is it's going to avoid probate for you.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know if we want to talk about probate. I will leave that to you, but it's like really important things like that. So she's walking around, by the way, my employee, thinking she's protected and all good. And she has a special needs son. And turns out, after we have a sit down, after she starts working here, she says, oh my gosh, we have to fix this. We have to fix this right now. And I said, yeah, we do. Yeah, we do. You're right.
Yeah.
So I don't know how much of that is going on out there. I bet a lot.
I would imagine a lot too, because we are in a economy where people are trying to save money and they don't realize they're actually creating more problems and losing money by doing things that should be done by someone who knows what they're doing. No, I appreciate that. So let's talk about how often families should revisit or
Mhm.
update their stuff. And I will tell you that my dad passed away in February, and the will that my mom and my dad had my uncle, who's now in his mid 80s, and myself, my sisters, were all adults, and he was still our guardian. That's
Uh-huh.
how old their document was. So let's talk about people shouldn't go that long. Let's talk about how often they should, though, revisit their
Yeah.
documents.
So you want to revisit your planning every 3 to 5 years is pretty standard,
Okay.
but it may be sooner than that. If you have any kind of major life changes, such as getting married, getting divorced, having a child, even having grandchildren, changing locations, and I don't mean inside Texas, I mean you've moved here from another state. You're going to want to have your current documents reviewed by the local estate planning attorney. So those are some examples of, traditionally 3 to 5 years, but certainly if you have any of those major life changes. And that includes also, by the way, checking up, updating beneficiaries, right? On those
Mhm.
life insurance policies or any of your financial investments that pass with a beneficiary designation, because it doesn't matter what your will or trust says, those are going to pass according to what your beneficiary designation is. So that means, and sometimes you're not married to your spouse any longer and you haven't updated that, there is a potential for your ex-spouse to receive that money.
We have a heartbreaking story that happened to one of our clients, and it was his new wife who suffered because the ex got it was still on there, and it would have been nothing that he would have wanted, and yet that's the way it went down.
And it's unfortunately, I know people probably find it hard to believe, but it happens. It happens.
It
And
does.
now I've gotten the call from both sides of that story. I've gotten
Mm,
the call from the ex-wife saying, "Do I have to give this money?" And from the new wife who's like, "How can I go get this money?" And
mm,
and we all like to think that everyone would do the right thing.
mhm.
Okay, that's really good in theory, Christy, but let me tell you what, it's not a way to plan. Do not plan on people doing the right thing. Get your
Agreed.
house in order because sometimes they do the right thing, but when it
Yeah.
comes to money and grief, and it stirs up a lot of stuff,
Yeah.
and people sort of lose their mind sometimes.
Yeah, that's so true, and it's sad to see, but if you love your loved ones, take care of this kind of stuff. And so that kind of segues into my next question because what's an approach for talking with, your parents if they don't have this in place? It's a pretty sensitive topic. What advice would you give people for talking to their parents to make sure these kind of things are taken care of?
Yeah, absolutely. Because that's where it all starts, I think, is in the talking and the communication. I think one thing I would like to say, and I say this to most people, is that having your estate plan in place is more about the peace of mind and love than it is about the documents in some ways. Now, the documents have to be correct and legally sound and all of that. But where you're coming from is a place of love, protection. And I think that's a good place to start. For example, if you have parents that are older, one thing I'm seeing is there's a huge increase in this elder fraud and scamming. These scammers, it's pitiful how good they are at tricking people because my brain always says imagine if they put all that hard work into doing something good for the world,
Right.
but yeah, what an amazing place this could be. But instead, they're thinking up the next new scam and how to do it. And I've got clients who've fallen for this, and they are smart, intelligent people, and the scammers are that good. So, one place to start could be with a concern, right? Like, I want you to be safe. I want your needs to always be met. And also, as your loved one who might be in charge if you get sick or pass away, I really would like to know what you want because it's very disorienting to lose someone and then be faced with 8 million decisions and everybody's looking for a piece of it. And
Yeah.
So I think talking about having an open conversation with concerns, or even talking about, I really want to make provisions for this kiddo, my kid or sibling or whatever, but they have issues. They have substance abuse issues. They have gambling issues. Sometimes this is keeping people from having the conversation because it's like acknowledging it in a way. So I think, so one thing when I sit down with folks is we start with, hey, why are we here? What are we trying to accomplish? What's going on? Has something happened? And so I think that's a good way to bring it up. Another way that I've seen have a lot of success is, hey, my best friend just did this with her parents. Have you thought about doing this? What are your thoughts on it?
Mm,
And I think from most of the people, you're going to get really the parents or whoever is going to say something like, I've been thinking about this a lot too, because
yeah.
we naturally start to think about it as we get older. And it's very few and far between are the folks that bring it up and it's immediately rejected. There is this very small percentage of people, but they are out there. I've met with them and they just don't believe in planning. And I don't really understand it. I keep trying to understand where that's coming from, but it's coming from a lack of understanding and education because
It definitely is.
they believe this thing happens automatically or will happen automatically.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing that's just really difficult is facing the idea I might get sick, I might become incapacitated. And
Yeah.
we all know there's 100% chance that we're going to pass. It's, we just hope we have longer than we do.
Yeah. Well, I can't tell you the number of people that I have heard say, "Oh, I'm gonna leave my house to, you know, Joey and
Mhm.
not Susie. Susie doesn't need it. Susie doesn't want it." But they've not done anything to leave it to Joey, and they're like, "Well, everybody knows." That's not how it works.
Oh,
It's not how it works. So, it's
how it
so
works.
important.
Yeah, and again, you're back to that, I hope the one I don't want it to go to does the right thing since she's much more well off than Joey, because
It's
that's what's
even s
happening in their
yeah.
brain.
Yeah, yeah. It's even stressful for Susie, who then has to be involved and deal with stuff that she may not even have wanted to deal with, or she may not, you know, give Joey what it's just
Yes,
hard. So people need to know.
because everything we're talking about is a lack of, you haven't made your decisions, you haven't made your choices, you haven't done your planning. But yeah, certainly yes, it puts a strain on everyone.
Yeah,
Yes.
it really, really does. So, what are some practical first steps for people who may have been procrastinating this, or maybe they feel overwhelmed by the thought of this? They're like, I can only just deal with one thing." What would be your practical one thing? What would you tell them?
I mean, I would start with the basics, right? What happens if you get sick or incapacitated? That's going to be that durable power of attorney and your medical power of attorney.
So that
What
would be, hey, start here.
Yeah. And then what happens when I pass away? Where does my
Yeah,
stuff go? And I mean, so that's a basic, it's just your basic plan, but can I give an example why this is important?
absolutely.
Okay. And one that I see that absolutely shocks people, but it's the law. So, speaking in particular to blended families, and there's a lot of blended families out in the world now. If you haven't done your planning, you are not going to like what happens. So, if you are coming together as, a couple, and I will just use husband and wife to make just standard talk
Yep,
about it. So, and he is bringing children from a prior relationship and she's bringing children from a prior relationship. And one of the spouses passes. What people don't understand is the deceased spouse's half of the assets are going to go to their children, to the deceased spouse's children. That's what the state of Texas plan says for us to do with those assets. And that could be quite, I think, economically disastrous for the
mm,
surviving spouse because
hmm,
now she's lost half a house. Now she's lost half a bank account. Now she's lost half of the investments. And she's got maybe still kids to raise and house payment to make and a job to go to. And not to mention the fact that that's probably not how the deceased spouse wanted it to work out. So, true story, that's the way it happens. And it's it is one of it's just a really hard thing when I get the call that this has happened.
Yeah.
So with a blended family. So that's
Yeah.
just a simple example where if you have a will and your will says what to do, hey, we can put some aside for your kids. 100% we can do that. But what's most people want to make sure their spouse is taken care of so that they can focus on the main thing, right? Raising the kids, getting through this terrible thing that has happened. So
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. Well, I appreciate your expertise, Amy. I always ask my guests if there's one more piece of advice or one more thing that you would want people to know about this planning process. Is there something that we didn't cover?
there is one thing that is holding everyone back, and it is procrastination. That is your number one thing standing between you and your peace of mind and protecting your spouse and your kids or whoever you love or whatever charities you love. And I promise it's not scary. Like, I know it sounds awful to come in but generally, whether it's whoever you work with, it should be a conversation. What you want should be discussed. Any concerns should be raised at that point. And what I find, Christy, at the end of our process, when everything's signed and the bow is on top, that people visibly exhale, lower their shoulders, and look at me and say, I'm going to sleep a lot better now.
Yeah.
So if you hear what I'm saying, I am talking about this is a peace of mind process. This is an emotional process, yes, but like we use documents to give your whoever you love protection, give you peace of mind, and that's what I want people to focus on. Is this is about love, peace of mind, and it's going to happen, so let's go ahead and plan for what you want. Plan for what
Right.
you want. Make your decisions.
Right. Yeah. That's amazing. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate your time today. And I am sure that people will get something out of the things that you had to share with us.
I hope so. Thank you so much, Christy.